Today I'm going to talk about tithing.
Yay!
Yes! Exactly, that's the reaction I was hoping and expecting from Anna-Marie, actually.
I have a question. What's
Yes?
it called when you lose your childhood teeth?
What?
Teething or something else.
Teething.
Okay. I just want to make sure I understood.
So what was the question? What?
Sorry.
Okay. So for those online, there was a joke here that I didn't understand. But
Sorry.
so I've been talking to Peter ever since he became national leader that he has to talk about tithing, because I always had this question, and I always was curious of what's what basically. And then several times, I can't remember how many times I asked Peter, and eventually Peter said, "Well, Johannes, I think you should do it." And I said, "I don't want to do it." And he said, "No, I'm asking you to do it." And I said, I shouldn't have said anything. But I reflected on it and I thought, okay, because I don't like talking about these kind of things like money or like, but I thought if I'm uncomfortable, then maybe I'm just the right person to talk about it. And just a short history of my tithing is that I remember the first time I gave a tithe. And I had been working at Arlanda for about a year. And I did not give a tithe. And I spoke to my mom and told her, I was like, "Mom, I'm not tithing." And she's like, "Why?" And I was like, "Well, I don't really know how to do it or like what, or like I don't even know where to send the money." And she said, "Okay, no worries. I'll give you the information." She gave me the information, and the next day I'd sent a bulk of money, like a whole year's worth of tithing. And I remember like, so at that point it was a whole salary, you know. It's 12 months, it's more than a salary, because tithing is 10% of your salary. And I wrote, and I knew Anna-Marie was going to get it, so I wrote, "Ich hab's geschafft," which means I made it. And the next time I met Anna-Marie, she actually had like some chocolate for me, because she was so she was really happy for me, really. And that was very nice, because I really gave it with a heart of giving, and then I received something. And then I don't know what happened in the communication, but I never got chocolate again. I mean, so maybe that's a little bit of my history of tithing. That for me, it's not really anything. It's something nice, because that was my experience from Anne-Marie, and I appreciated that.
I don't remember.
But this is basically what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the history of tithing, like basically coming from the Bible and how it came from one person to a nation, and then how Jesus also made it an artistic offering, and then a little bit of Swedish history. And then what does True Father and True Mother say about this, and then some of Peter's thoughts and my own thoughts. And so when I was going through these quotes and these histories from the Bible, I realized that thanks to Tim, actually, we went to Sunday service. Sunday school. Yes, Sunday school. Thank you. And I realized that these stories are not so unfamiliar to me. And I realized it was quite easy to find what I was looking for, because I had this knowledge. So once again, Tim, thank you for every Saturday, but also thank you for Sunday school. So the story of tithing in the Bible begins long before the laws of Moses. Abraham, who I learned in Sunday school, later changed his name to Abraham. Abraham, I don't remember exactly, but means something like father, and Abraham means father of everything or something like this. After a great victory, meets a mysterious figure who's called Melchizedek. He was king of Salem and a priest of God Most High. Melchizedek blesses Abraham, reminding him that his success came not from his own strength, but from the hand of God. In gratitude and recognition, Abraham offers him a tenth of all he has. This is the first tithe recorded in Scripture. It was not a command, but a spontaneous act of worship. Abraham acknowledged that everything he owned ultimately belonged to God. Generations later, God gives Israel the law through Moses, and what Abraham once did freely becomes a covenant practice. In Leviticus 27, God declares, "Every tithe of the land is the Lord's. It is holy to the Lord. The tithe is no longer just an individual act of gratitude, but a national rhythm of life. Every harvest, every 10th animal, every increase of the land was to be set aside as holy." It reminded Israel that their land, their crops, and their herds were not theirs alone. They were gifts from God to be stewarded and reverenced and shared for the support of God's house and the care of his people. So there you see already the growth of it being one person to becoming something that we all do in the Bible in Israel. But then Jesus comes along. And by the time of Jesus, the tithe had become a firmly established practice. The Pharisees were meticulous about it. They even counted out tiny portions of their spices, their mint, dill, and cumin, to make sure that every 10th part went to God. Outwardly, it looked impressive, but Jesus saw deeper. In Matthew 23:23, he warns them, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you tithe mint and dill and cumin, but you have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness." Notice carefully, Jesus does not condemn the tithe itself. He says, "These you ought to have done. The tithe is good and right," without neglecting the other. The problem was not their giving, the problem was their hearts. They were so focused on the rule of tithing that they missed its purpose to form a people of justice, mercy, and love. And this was one of the quotes that I so clearly remember from Sunday school. And then one day, as Jesus sat by the temple treasury, he watched people bringing their offerings. The wealthy came with large amounts, gifts that were seen and admired. But then he saw her, a widow, quietly dropping in 2 tiny copper coins, all she had to live on. And Jesus said, "This poor widow has given more than all the others." Why? Because the true measure of giving is not the amount, but the heart. Her gift was born of total trust in God. So what does Jesus teach us about tithing? That it is good, but it is not enough on its own. Tithing without love is empty. The tithe was meant to train the heart, to remind us that everything we have belongs to God, and to push us into deeper trust. Jesus redirects the focus from calculation to compassion, from obligation to devotion. He affirms the tithe, but he fulfills it with something greater, the heart of the sacrificial love. And since we are in Sweden, I thought it would be relevant to give the Swedish perspective on this. Here in Sweden, the tithe, tionde, was not only a religious duty but also a form of social welfare and deeply ingrained in our society. Farmers brought the 10th of their harvest, their milk, their calves, and these were stored in great tithe barns. So next to the church, you'd have these big barns where they would then store the tithe because money wasn't always the way of tithing. From there, the resources supported priests, maintained the parish, and cared for the poor and needy. And I wanted to add this, I thought it sounded funny, the beggar regulation of 1642, where even the beggar regulation even required each parish to provide for its poor, and the tithe became the foundation of the system. In this way, tithing shaped not just the faith, but also community life, making the church more ingrained in society, forcing also the church to take care of the people who need it the most. But this closeness also brought entanglement between church and state. The tithe was no longer always a free act of devotion. It became a tax, an obligation, something the crown could claim or redirect. What began as an offering of love sometimes hardened into a duty, enforced by law, and when giving is reduced to obligation, it can lose the heart of worship that God intended. And I remember in school that we were learned that, the separation of church and state was to protect the state. But what we don't learn is that many times it was also protection for the church from the government. Because now the king couldn't just step in and be like, oh, 2/3 of all the tithes should go to me, which was what the king sometimes also did. But to still know that this is deeply ingrained in our society. But then also when we reflect about the church position in our society, today it's maybe forgotten, or maybe the Swedish church does a lot, but as a Swedish citizen, I don't know what the Swedish church does. So then why would I give a tithe to the Swedish church? And today, if anything, we expect our state to support the church, because that's our relationship with the church. And I thought that was interesting. If we then look at what Reverend Sun Myung Moon says about this, Father said very clearly, tithing is a basic duty of the chosen children. This is not about money. It is about training ourselves as stewards. When we offer the first portion, we prove that everything belongs to God. Without this offering, Satan still has a claim. With it, we restore God's ownership and open the way for blessing. And this offering must be pure, Father said. You should offer something pure in which you have invested your utmost devotion, not the leftovers. Not what costs us nothing, but the fruits, the parts that carries our heart. In restoration, the condition matters more than the size of the gift. So in our church, the providence of restoration is such a key element. And this is where I would say Sun Myung Moon maybe raises the bar. That it's not just about us. It's also about restoring the physical so that God can work in the physical. Then to Dr. Hakian Moon. And Tremada reminds us of the bigger picture. Every day that you live, you must live your life offering joy and glory to heaven. Tithing is not only about 1/10 of our money. It is about learning a lifestyle of offering our time, our talents, our resources, our whole heart. That is the path of restoration, the way we build the kingdom of heaven on earth. Which I also think is pretty beautiful. Then, what does Peter say? Peter gave me notes, but they didn't come in the presentation here. So give me a second, please. 2 computers here. Let's do like this. So Peter actually asked Umberto Angolucci. And I thought it was nice, but I didn't want to share it. But then Peter, before the service, he said, you have to share it. It was very beautiful. Okay. Tithing is a spiritual condition for our good fortune. You can give 10%, but you may want to give more if you wish. My family always gives 30%. This is our family tradition. I can say from experience, once you give with good heart, heaven will bless your money and the needs of your family. If you're not able for some reason to give 10%, you can start to give some amount every month, and each the minimum of 10%. I'm having many devices here in the front. And I always appreciate the leaders who not just speak but also act. And I think that's admirable that someone gives 30%. That's very beautiful. This is Peter, who surely has something good. We should always live our lives in total unity and devotion to God. Everything we do and everything we want should be given in unity with God. Although giving all our time and all our money to God and His providence. Tithing is a symbolic version of that, where we give our life and time to God in the symbolic amount of 10%. On top of giving tithing, I encourage everyone to also give 10% of their time for others. Thanks, Peter. We got some applause here where Peter also applauded himself. Very nice. So, what do I say about this? Because I said I was going to share my thoughts. And I thought it was almost a little bit comical to have two parents and then suddenly a picture of Peter and me. So, I strongly believe that tithing is a physical act. I mean, we're a community here. We have to pay for things. We want to do things. And we want to do bigger things. And money is a big part of that. And we cannot forget that money plays a big role in what we do. We're now talking about maybe finding a new place for our community. And we cannot do that if we don't have the financial means to do that. But more than that, tithing is a spiritual act. As we can call it a condition. We're familiar with that word in our community. And in my line of work, we measure and then we adjust so that we can be successful. That is how we create the circumstances to have good teams and processes and make money, basically. Conditions, in a spiritual way, open the door for the spirit world to act. So a spiritual condition is to create the circumstances for the spirit world to work. And when I grew up in this movement, and you hear about like how religion is can be so strong and judgmental, and you're supposed to do this and you're not supposed to do that. And like when I asked my mom if like about tithing, and she was very strong, I said, of course you should do tithing. It's not a question about it. And that can seem a bit hard sometimes, but one has to remember that our actions have physical consequences, but they also have spiritual consequences. And when we do a spiritual condition, we create the circumstance for the spirit world to work. And so when someone says, don't drink alcohol, don't do this, it's because that if you understand what these actions actually do to you, you wouldn't do it. If there's a hot stove, you wouldn't touch it because you're going to burn your finger. But the spiritual things are not always so easy to understand. So in the biblical perspective, when we get these hard laws, when we get these, it's easy to forget the artistic part of it because it comes on so strong. But it is because some people understand the consequences of our own actions when others of us don't. So they can help us. Regardless of age or circumstances, when I was researching this topic, because I found so much information, the conclusion was very clear that you should always tithe. If you cannot give a tenth, then you should give what you can, because not everyone has the ability to give a tenth if things are really tight. But then you give a small portion, and of course you do so with a happy heart. And if you're really lucky, you can get some chocolate from Anna Marie. But don't expect it. So with that, I want to say thank you.